And I call on Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. For most of the First Minister's statement, she spoke of the pressing issues facing Scotland right now. Finally putting more teachers in our schools, finally delivering on childcare promises, finally focusing on climate change and the climate emergency. On these issues, there are points where we can agree and work constructively with parties across this chamber. But ultimately, as always, this comes down to independence for the SNP. It's there in the third line of her statement. It took just 15 seconds for Nicola Sturgeon to talk up the prospect of another referendum. She speaks... Of course, we're not going to go back to the old ways of Westminster unless it suits the SNP. Nicola Sturgeon speaks of bringing people... Nicola Sturgeon speaks of bringing people together, then pushes the most divisive proposal imaginable. This isn't a speech to unite Scotland. It's not a statement of the people's priorities. It's a regurgitation of the SNP's top priority. It sets up the same old us versus them choice, the same bitterness, the same division, the same proposals that the SNP thrive on. But this Parliament does have a choice. Either we can be a Parliament of action that focuses 100% on people's priorities and gets things done using the powers that this Parliament has right now, or another 5 years will be wasted as this government gets more and more distracted as time goes on. The Scottish Conservatives have set out our priorities. At least 15 bills to rebuild Scotland, to spread opportunities across the country, to restore power to our communities. So let me ask the First Minister, will she agree to bring forward a right to recovery, to tackle our shameful drug deaths in this country? Will she work with us on a victims' law to put our justice system on the side of victims? Will she bring forward an enterprise bill that delivers economic recovery for every single part of Scotland? And why? Why should any of these pressing issues take a back seat to the First Minister's drive for another independence referendum?
First Minister.
So in summary answer to the question that Douglas Ross ended on there, yes, I'm happy, as I said in my statement, to discuss all of these ideas and suggestions as we finalise, as we will do later this year, our programme for government for the first full year of this new Parliament. So that invitation is there, the door is open, and I hope we will see parties across this chamber walk through that and work with us as we try to not pretend that we don't have differences of opinion. We live in a democracy, but be prepared to rise above those differences to work together in the common good. I think I've made clear today my willingness to do that. More generally, in response to Douglas Ross, we have of course just had an election, that wonderful expression of democracy. In that election, I said to the Scottish people that if I was re-elected as First Minister, I would prioritise, first and foremost, leading us through the COVID recovery. I would put forward an ambitious policy programme to drive our economic recovery. And then when the crisis was over, I would propose that the people of Scotland got the opportunity to choose our long-term future. My party won that election, and I have set out today how I intend to deliver on the commitments I made in that election and which were so thoroughly endorsed in the mandate that the Scottish people gave us. And Douglas Ross is right to say most of my statement focused on what we will do just in our first 100 days, building on the progress we've made. He talked about teachers and childcare. Teacher numbers in our schools have been increasing ever since I became First Minister. We've been taking forward the plans to double childcare, and that has been slightly delayed because of COVID, but from August this year, that promise will be delivered in full, and now we're moving on to the next phase. So that is our focus, and I say to people across this chamber, stop refighting the election. The people of Scotland had their say and made their decision. Now let's debate our differences robustly and in a spirit of civility, but let's come together where we can to work on the things we can agree on in the interest of the people of Scotland.
Annie Wells, to be followed by Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We didn't hear an answer to Douglas Ross's earlier question, so let me ask the First Minister again. Despite Scotland's appalling drug death figures, many people are being denied the help they need. So will the First Minister support our proposals for a right to recovery bill to enshrine in law that everyone should have access to the necessary drug or alcohol treatment that they need?
First Minister.
I'm afraid Annie Wells, if she had listened, did hear an answer to the question. Yes, I am prepared to discuss that. I'm not going to stand here. I don't know the detail of what the Scottish Conservatives are proposing. I don't know all of the detail of that. And in government, it is important that we understand the detail before we give commitments to take something forward. But there is, and I hope the Scottish Conservatives can find it within themselves to actually embrace the areas where we might be able to build common ground. So there is a willingness and an open door to discuss that. And if Annie Wells can perhaps stop sort of mouthing things at me from a sedentary position, we could perhaps genuinely find some common ground. Now, I can't be more positive and fairer than that. It's up to the Scottish Conservatives whether they choose to respond in an equally positive way.
Oliver Mundell, to be followed by Colette Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Despite the best efforts of teachers, parents, carers and young people, most pupils in Scotland have lost out on an estimated 16 weeks of classroom lessons over the last year. This disruption follows on from 14 years of SNP failure and the First Minister's broken promise to make education her #1 priority. Surely now is the time to put our young people first. So will the First Minister consider funding all 3,500 new teaching and learning assistant posts now so that they can make the maximum contribution to helping our young people catch up and give those who need it most the best chance of success?
First Minister.
Oliver Mundell raises reasonable questions, but in his characterisation of this government, I would simply say that his assessment is not shared by the Scottish people. I stand here as a re-elected First Minister with a record number of votes, and I suspect if the Scottish Conservatives continue to try to refight the election and over again, they will end up having the same outcomes. But on the substance of the question, we will consider how quickly we make the funding available for the 3,500 teachers and classroom assistants. Of course, as Oliver Mundell will be aware, this is not just about funding, it's about how quickly it is practically possible to recruit teachers. So this is an important priority for us, and we will take that forward as quickly as possible. In our first 100 days, we will make the funding available for 1,000 teachers and 500 classroom assistants. More generally, there is a job of work to do to help young people catch up, not just in educational terms, but also in social and well-being terms as well, which is why the summer programme that I mentioned in my statement is important too, and I know the Education Secretary will be making available more details of that shortly.
Presiding Officer, my apologies. The Auditor-General, First Minister, recently heavily criticised the Scottish Government for, and I quote, a lack of clarity and transparency when it came to the spending of public money, saying that much more should have been done to provide value for money and to facilitate the necessary parliamentary scrutiny. So what steps has the First Minister put in process to address these very serious concerns for the Auditor-General?
First Minister.
We respond to all Audit Scotland reports, and we set out the steps that we will be taking in response to recommendations that are made, and that will be the case in that report. Of course, scrutiny of this government is a key part of the responsibilities of this Parliament. We are, even after the resounding election victory that we have just enjoyed, we are a minority government, and therefore it is incumbent on all of us to work together to make sure that that scrutiny is robust, and we've all got a job to do there, the committees of this Parliament, the opposition parties in this Parliament and us as a government, to make sure that we aid that transparency. So on that, as on everything else, the election is over. We have all had our say in the election, we've all had the arguments in the election, and the people have decided. This is in many ways the opportunity for a fresh start, to respect the differences between us. But I say again, my door is open, the door of this government is open to anybody who wants to come to us with good ideas about how we can make life better for the people of Scotland. I'm ready to listen. The question is, are other parties in this Parliament ready to work in that way?